afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining ARG's Technology Town Hall. Very much appreciate it. It'll be a shock if we can get through the next hour without any dogs barking, kids coming in and interrupting, or family members army crawling to the printer in the office to print out schoolwork for kids. But if we can accomplish that, I think we've all won. I know my kids are quarantined to the basement and know that Dad's on a call. So really appreciative of everybody joining. Having these technology town halls was the result of our last couple webinars. The response that we got was overwhelmingly positive. So we wanted to attempt to bring you in a regular cadence right now every other week, depending on the response that we receive from all of you, where we bring our best and brightest, our technology specialists to you, and we help to do two things. One, we'd like to share with you the insights that we're garnering from conversations with your peers literally every single day. Just earlier today, I looked back and just wanted to see, since March 1st, how many client discussions, how many conversations with you and your peers have we had? And it was 632 conversations. And the people that I've asked to join us here, our panelists, are the deep domain experts that have helped many of our clients transition as they've worked from home and then care for their IT infrastructure. So we thought, what better way to use all of our time than to have these individuals come, share some of the insights. We've consolidated some of those, which we'll insert into this conversation. But if anybody watches Anderson Cooper and Sanjay Gupta on the CNN town halls, sort of the same deal, right? We'll answer some of the most commonly heard questions, but we will also take live questions from the audience as part of this. Before we jump in, just a reminder, what we do on a daily basis is help our clients make thoughtful business decisions. And I think now more than ever, that's really, really important. But also, because we're talking to so many of you on a day in and day out basis, what we found is the benefit of having our nearly 100 coworkers available to you to help you through this time has been really, really, really well received. Please know that we're here for you. We're here to help. We're here to guide you through whatever it is that you're working on, whether it be getting users set up remotely or working on new security policies that you didn't have to think about 5 or 6 weeks ago. You have us here, and there's really no question too big or too small that we're not here to support you with. So with that, what we've asked for today is for our experts to come and to put some guardrails around where we'll keep the conversation is really around these core areas of expertise, and there's some specific areas that we've seen more discussion happen in the last few weeks than others. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into some of the content. As your questions come in, we'd love to incorporate those into the dialogue. So, kind of first up here, guys, we've seen usage in collaboration tools absolutely explode. I think based on everything we're seeing in our own client discussions, as well as what we're seeing out just publicly in the marketplace, the clear winners so far have really been Microsoft and Zoom. We've seen Zoom both at work and at home for team huddles and web conferences and virtual happy hours, but more often than not, we're seeing Microsoft Teams really be the enterprise solution that really helped clients make that very quick pivot, not within weeks of having to work from home suddenly, but within hours and days. So the first thing I think we'd like to explore and unpack a bit, and really probably some of the most common conversations that we're having, is around, we used it for the first 5 weeks and we're up, we're running, we're doing business. And I think that is a huge testament to many of you on the phone here. Business is still happening as a result of IT teams everywhere pivoting quickly and getting organizations up and running. But I'm going to direct this first set of questions to Jim and Steve specifically. Jim, now that a company's leveraging Teams, could you just talk through some of the governance and access control considerations that we're hearing?
Sure. Yeah, and it's interesting to me. One of the things that was surprising a little bit, didn't really think it all the way through, is that many of our clients were not thinking about that teams. When you create a team, it actually creates a whole set of infrastructure underneath it, right? It creates a SharePoint environment, creates a one notebook for that team, which is great, you know, that it automatically provisions and automatically does those things. But the reality is that kind of can change our governance policies, right? We now have sites that are outside of our typical control, our existing span of control, I guess I'd say. And now we have another set of infrastructure that actually we have to know what's being put there, who has access to it, how are we controlling that, and who's managing and delivering across that. So the governance and access control really from the who has access to documents, not necessarily the, you know, the Active Directory side of things, but, you know, really creating that and driving that is a challenge within teams, one that many people didn't really think through as they roll this out internally, and can be difficult to manage.
And Jim, let me just add, I mean, it's an entirely new framework for end users to manage their own work streams and their own sharing of resources. You know, historically, or in the past, most organizations would have a file server with access control lists set up to protect certain assets. A typical organization might have a small amount of proprietary work that they want to keep close in terms of who can access that. And information was shared over email generally. Someone would request a document. That person would informally review whether or not that individual was authorized to receive that information. If so, they would send it, and the information was controlled in terms of version and in terms of the date and timestamp that happened. Now in a Teams environment, you have ongoing access across a larger number of people. Sometimes that access control list or that group list isn't monitored very well, and you really do lose a lot of visibility as to who has access to what information.
Yeah, that maintaining that PII, that personally identifiable information it becomes potentially more difficult if you have any of those information, because you know we put those things into place and we allow a team that isn't necessarily as Steve was talking about, a real set Active Directory control team. It's just a team of my selection when I clicked around in Microsoft to make it.
Right. And then if someone creates a file on their computer and uploads it to that team environment, where does that live? How do you document it? How do you categorize it so it is part of the larger information domain? There's a lot of new thought process that has to go into managing data in a Teams environment versus our traditional environment. We have better tools. The tools are fantastic to do the stuff that we probably or knew we should have been doing in the past. But now that we have better tools, the expectations are going to be a lot higher for IT to take a sort of a leadership role in information governance.
Yeah.
So would you guys? Go ahead. Did I cut you off there?
Well, yeah, the one thing I was going to add is that this actually gets into backup and recovery around that environment as well, right? Yeah, I think that people wrongly, and we've talked about this for years, but people still do assume that when I go to Microsoft, I have some level of backup control and management. And the reality is that in Office 365, you have limited recovery ability and backup. So you know that Office 365 environment does not have a true backup and DR. So as you're putting information that is critical in there, you now start running the risk of having that mission critical data perhaps go away. And we've seen it actually with people who said, hey, I was using Teams and I put some documents in OneDrive and now they're gone. well, that wasn't, they wanted to backup restore. The organization was like, well, we're not backing up OneDrive, so I don't know who deleted it, but we don't have it because they weren't leveraging that way 5 weeks ago. So those are some of those things. Now there are tools. There are tools like Veeam is one of the tools, and there are many others out there and ways to do that that we can work with to get it in there, to get recoverable, to help clients make sure that anything that is going into OneNote and OneDrive and SharePoint are there for the duration and get some backup control around it for sure. But that's an important part of that.
Yeah, but then, Jim, if I can add, you jump into, again, a policy area where you have to start training people to manage their files and manage their work differently. There are so many different options in Office 365, especially when you open up Teams as an option on how you can manage your information. You can put it in SharePoint in a library, or you can put it in a Teams environment. You can share it on your personal OneDrive account, or you can keep it in a universal drive or file structure. IT has to set that policy. They have to manage the organization to that policy so they can do things like manage effective backups strategies, be able to recover information when people aren't exactly sure where they put it. There are a lot of indexing and categorization tools that are available, but without everyone sort of working in the same manner, it's going to become a little chaotic without good controls.
Yep.
Yeah, Steve, not to put you on the spot, but I know when we were talking about some of the topics that we would cover for today, you had kind of walked me through an example with a law firm that you had talked with over the last several weeks, specifically around kind of the back end risk management that you both were just describing. Can you share that with the audience?
Yeah, sure. So the example, and thanks for prompting that. The example is if I'm a law firm or an association or any organization that is going to have an environment where I have employees working on information, and I might have outside parties, partners, clients working on collaborative sessions. How do I manage and control that information flow? How do I know when a person, let's say an outside third party, whether it be a client person or an industry relationship, no longer needs access to that group? What's the sunset date for allowing people to review that information? If people come and leave from the group over time, who's in charge of making sure that the access list is being reviewed? Again, it's an opportunity for IT, I think. It's going to have to change the way that we manage groups. The group leadership will now no longer be more about production. It'll also include control aspects, and it's a different way of people working, and we have to set some guardrails so people know how to operate.
Cool, thanks for that. And then Jim, just a follow-up for you, because you started going down the path of tooling, but I think there's kind of two things. One, I know in the last several weeks we've run into, multi-site organizations who maybe used another what was a geo-diverse site for backups, or where backup in DR wasn't the extra insurance policy that the organization wanted to take. So backups were on tape and they were on site, and then someone tests positive and now they can't get into that site. So if they had a failure at that moment, toast.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit about cost, and then give me a little bit about just some of the hygiene that we're seeing right now as we're having these conversations, because the world's kind of changed a bit.
Yeah, sure. So from a cost perspective, I'll tackle that one first. And when you're talking about cost, I think you're talking about the tooling stuff around backup in Office 365. Is that correct? Yeah. So typically those things start somewhere around $3 per user to implement those. It can be more, they can be less, but they're right around there, give or take. bit. Now, on the backup hygiene, I think that is actually, you know, one of the things we've seen. You talked about one of the clients we've seen that they literally they went 2 weeks where they could not. No one was allowed in their building. That they had to have industrial, and the CDC came and closed down the building, and did no ability. Their data centers on site. Their other data center was in another office in another part of the country. Fantastic. They can't really do anything if an application breaks. If an individual piece of hardware goes down, they couldn't go in to access it, migrate it. You know, that's where I see the benefit when we talk about managed disaster recovery. You know, that's where management in those things kind of come in, and really looking at it in a holistic approach. It does feel like insurance a lot of times when we're talking about PR. People feel like it is an insurance policy. I think that you know, this is just another step. I'll give a brief thing. I was reading this week about somebody who has been in the business continuity space for a long time. And the first continuity one I did was in 2006. I did a full continuity plan for a company, and you know, at the time we actually talked about these kind of pandemics, but they seemed ridiculous, truthfully. And that's what this person was saying online. They're like, every time I've written this for the past 6 years, I've thought this is crazy. Now, the reality is we're seeing what that impact was, and this wasn't what we thought it would be, truthfully, when we talked through that. But being able to have someone who is the mission critical, who has the ability to deliver those where we are not considered that mission critical. My internal IT necessarily is not considered mission critical, but the data center operators, the cloud operators are considered mission critical and can deliver and deploy those services for us. So it's just that added layer of assistance that just can't get around. Did that answer your question, Mike, about that?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. What about, you know, I know we think about this in our business as we're moving from a desktop to a multi-factor MFO, SSO solution, you know, kind of personally, but what about file server considerations? So actually I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
One is around file server considerations. I'm just going to rifle them both at you so I
Good.
One is file server. The second is around perceptions on implementation. And what I mean by that is, in a perfect world when we're all at the office, you would have taken step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and you would have done that methodically and consistently. Now, you may not do those same steps to get to a perfect result. So can maybe you just walk through, like, okay, so if I haven't had good backup hygiene, I know I'm giving you a lot here. If I don't have good
it's okay. You'll keep me on track.
Am I limited by my remote working to get to a better place? And can you talk through some of those kind of good, better, best scenarios? And then I am curious on the file server thing.
Yeah,
because I want to know to you.
So there's certainly a lot of ways to solve for file server issues. They kind of do depend on your specific situation. So I'm going to talk in generic, high level terms. So from if my infrastructure is on premises today, and I need to replicate and DR my file server, there are tons of ways to do it, and to do it relatively fast. I mean, like, you know, a day, 2 days, right? To get it to a place where I've been putting this on tape and backing it up, and need to have it replicated to another provider where I could stand it up if I absolutely had to, with some challenges, but I could get it there. So that can be done fairly quickly. So that was one of the questions. The other was, now, in the event that I'm really in a place where I want to migrate away from my on-premises environment, we have seen this quite a bit. We're seeing people come in and being able to, in a couple of different approaches. One is in an MFA SSO perspective. They're taking, they're able to leverage SharePoint, or a tool like a SharePoint, a box, a Dropbox, one of those, and really migrate some mission critical infrastructure into there and wrap around their MFO and MFA and SSO around it, to really bring that together in a short time. But we are seeing some of our clients who have traditional workloads other than file server on-prem who are making a pivot to try and get to a BDI desktop as a service solution in a short period of time. And we're even seeing that happen in under 30 days for people. So people who say, hey, I have several on-premise applications that are SQL based and latency is an issue, and I can't just I can terminal server into them, but bandwidth is constrained and all of those things. So it's helping them get there from that pretty quick.
Good. And then cost-wise on what you just described.
Yes. Yeah, so the cost on that is really wide ranging. You can be a desktop. We're actually talking to an organization that needs GPU desktops because they do CAD and those kind of things. So in their case, they're talking probably about $180 per desktop. Now that's a very high-end capable desktop, all the way down to $6 per user for the kind of low-end file sync and sharing stuff.
Okay, cool. Murph, just to take the security conversation a little further, and I think this dovetails on what Jim was just describing. You told me yesterday that in the last 6 weeks or 5 weeks, a third of security breaches were due to a new wave of shadow IT. And 8 years ago, when phrase was formed, it was the guys out by the dumpster, the developers, right, drinking their Red Bull and smoking their vapes, moving dev servers to AWS. That was shadow IT. And you just
that was Jim, actually.
Yeah. And I got Murph to smile, so I get another $100.
Yeah, there you
go. Describe to me what we're hearing around both those security breaches and a little bit about what shadow IT means now.
Yeah, so happy to. So Jim kind of teed this up well. So I was on a webinar with one of the leading security firms yesterday, and they were talking about the explosion of end user targeting that's happening both within shadow IT and just more broadly, phishing campaigns. When people work from home, they're a little, they're a little less guarded. They might do things that they normally wouldn't do in an office-based environment. They might share their corporate device with their kids because they only have one family-based computer, but they have multiple children and they have to get online for classes and so forth. So there's a little, I won't say a little, there's a lot less control happening within the corporate-owned IT environment when people are working from home full time and other things are going on like remote learning. So the MFA conversation is great for sysadmin. It creates another layer of strong security. You can make very strict conditional access rules for those folks anytime they're logging in from a new IP address or after a certain number of days and not logging in, so forth. But you also want to extend that MFA experience, that SSO experience to your end users to help block against some of the bad hygiene that might be going on the personal device while it's outside of the corporate area. So a couple things that you can consider when you're thinking about MFA and SSO. Everyone's used to it. Everyone, when they're logging into Facebook or LinkedIn or so forth, are used to being challenged for additional security tokens. And SSO is one of the ways to drive adoption on this. Everyone's going to love you for introducing SSO, and they don't have to manage so many passwords. And what you're actually doing is you're shrinking the attack surface because you're restricting the number of user IDs and passwords that people have to manage and have to control. And you have a better resource there where you can monitor the activity within that login and environment, and making sure that there aren't multiple logins to Salesforce, for example. Most people don't have any visibility to that today. But with MFA and SSO, you actually can get some visibility into that. And just generally, one of the other things that was brought up yesterday during this webinar is that MFA has been shown to reduce account hijacking by as much as 95 to 98%. So it's not perfect, but it's really, really effective. So we encourage people to do that. Now, you can do this within Office 365. Most people have licensing right now that accommodates a basic MFA and basic SSO to a certain number of applications. If you want to get more advanced, there are P1 and P2 licenses that you can upgrade to get some better tools. But what I would ask people to think about before they go ahead and make that investment is, what is the organization's long-term strategy with regard to the Microsoft environment? Microsoft, was it 3 years ago from an office productivity perspective, but the world has changed a lot in 3 years, and people are looking outside of the Microsoft ecosystem for a lot of applications and a lot of tools, and leveraging public cloud environments, private cloud environments, and software as a service applications, web-based applications that reside outside of Microsoft. So the key thing I'd ask people to consider is, are you doing yourself a favor by making Active Directory your universal directory going forward? Or should you start to consider whether or not Active Directory should be the directory of record for your Microsoft environment, but consider a third-party directory service or identity management service as sort of your universal directory that can manage some of these independent applications, independent of Microsoft. And there are some products out there like an Okta or Duo Security, a Clear Login. They're all very, very effective. They'll integrate into your Microsoft environment, but they'll also be probably better suited to manage some of your third-party applications. And it's not expensive. But, those types of services start at about $6 to $8 per user, and gives you a lot of flexibility down the road as you continue to move outside of the Microsoft stack.
See, you knew I was going to ask about the dollars.
Yeah, I remembered that you pressed Jim on it twice, so I wanted to throw that in there. Good. Thanks for that.
Good stuff, guys. I want to turn maybe some attention to our friend John Cooper and Jeff Milford. I joke, but literally, you guys are two of the more busy people working wicked long hours. In March, we saw usage nearly double, almost more than double their previous 13-week averages as it relates to our clients, 4,000 plus clients using conference calling services. We saw our client base pivot quickly, typically leveraging really whatever like enterprise tools they had available to them. And now that we're all at home, they're starting to evolve, right? So now that the March bills are coming in April, that usage is starting to become apparent. Take me through, there was this initial mad dash to just get up and running, but maybe you guys, because we're starting to see examples of this and get more questions, what is day one kind of looking like? And then take me through that migration through to what would be, once we get all back up and running and back to normal, whether that's 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, kind of depends on which news network you watch on how far out we are. But could you guys, Cooper, why don't we start with you on what you're seeing there?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I mean, and you're right. I mean, we're having lots of conversations, obviously, before this all happened with customers, and wanted to talk about Teams and Zoom and workspace collaboration, and what do I do with my conferencing, and can't my phone system do that for me too? And yes, right, to all of it, right? But it's all use cases, and let's talk through it and take our time and have a good, thoughtful process to get there. And then all of a sudden, everybody's in a massive work from home proof of concept, right? And scrambling to figure out what to do. And so you normalize as fast as possible on what you probably have quick access to. And these providers have done a great job responding and trying to meet demand and giving free access and making it fast and deploy it instantly. And, that doesn't cover everything, but it gets you partly there. But this now becomes, it's starting to work. People are adopting it. People seem to like it. We're getting things done. I've seen lots of cases, people saying, honestly, I'm getting more done working from home, right? So it makes a lot of sense now. Let's continue the conversation. How can we extend that, right? Got a lot of free stuff deployed today, but what else can we do there, maybe free and otherwise? And I think, collaboration is a good place to start, right? Because, people want to, they need to meet with clients, talk to customers, have internal meetings, get stuff done. And it's hard to do over email. Hard to do sometimes with a simple conference call. You need that visual and that screen share. So tools like Teams, Zoom, obviously offer that. Now, you might take Teams as an example, and you've extended that out to the workforce. Everyone's got it. They're messaging with it. Teams are created. You've got hopefully some governance strategy and security in place now, to the earlier topics. And something simple that you can do as a next step is enable PSTN conferencing, dial in audio into those Teams meetings, right? With Microsoft, it's a $4 add-on. You can do that per user. It's really all you can eat conferencing with local access numbers everywhere. When you're extending that conferencing past the edge of your organization, that can be important, right? Especially with networks under a high amount of load now. Using VoIP as your audio method in the meeting isn't always as reliable anyway, and now much less so. So having that ability to dial in, especially for a customer call, as we're all trying to still maintain and conduct business, and you want things to go good and have a good experience for everybody, it's great to have that. And that's a simple next step. Maybe right behind that, and I'll hand it over to Jeff, is, a lot of companies started to work from home. How do I get my extension? How can I get my business call still and make my business call still with my business number? And, maybe your phone system didn't have or doesn't have a reliable way to give you that. Maybe there is no soft client or good mobile access, and you've got people using their personal cell phones from home all of a sudden, and then you have some real breakage in your policies and security practice, and people are using another number now that to call customers, right? So you've lost most of that governance that you want. That's another simple add-on for Microsoft, right? If you can set up a remote call forward from your existing PBX or your PRI provider or SIP provider, Microsoft can give you a temporary number, turn on voice service inside of Teams for you. It's an $8 license for the enablement of the feature, and then you buy a dial plan for $12 domestically, and again, you're off and running. Easy, quick to deploy, and you can use Teams to handle all those business calls, forward that number in, and again, another way to get your people at home working and more tightly connected into their former work environment, right? Doesn't bypass, what you're normally going to do to make a long-term decision, but for this quick access emergency response, that we're in right now, some pretty easy ways to get you there pretty quick.
And when you described the PSTN and the remote call forward temporary DIDs, how do you execute on that? I mean, we talked, I know in our last webinar about the approaches, and there's many. Probably the least common is using Microsoft as the telco. What are the ways most commonly that we're seeing clients execute on that proposition? So I think that's kind of like the next step.
Sure, exactly. And every voice project we're in discussion with wants to investigate Teams as an option because they have it. Microsoft's done a great job at making sure everybody does. It's a great application for workspace and messaging, and it's a vast improvement over Skype for Business, right? Which is, they've pushed hard to get everyone on this new user experience, and it's got massive adoption, right? And it's only driving even harder now. Makes logical sense. What else can I do with this thing, right? Can I extend those investments in this ecosystem where it makes sense? It's always going to be about the use case. And sometimes with Microsoft, it's not a gap in the application necessarily. Maybe your environment is a fit for Microsoft from an application perspective, but reliability, resiliency, survivability, SLAs, client experience, underlying support, Microsoft's a great software company, not always the best at those things, right? And that's not even take into account, this is a mission critical service. It's your company's phone system. It's how you do business for most companies, right? Your web meeting can be down and your conference bridge can have some issues and you're probably okay. But if your phone system's down, it's a different story, right? So a lot of times if the application's a fit, and that's the first layer to evaluate, okay, we really think Teams makes sense. ARG believes that as well. The data tells us that. There is a whole category of partners that can provide that PSTN connectivity, both conferencing and voice services to make it a phone system, telephony. Then these are what they call direct routing partners, gold certified Microsoft service provider partners, just long-standing relationships. But these are telecom backbones, real telephony networks with companies with experience in service delivery for mission critical applications that have these partnerships. And so that's the way that we find typically as a more of a long range plan. Companies are consuming that as a service. Best of both worlds, if you will, Microsoft's application and that user experience paired with reliable PSTN connectivity and better support. And the good news is in all of that, it's a more cost-effective way to buy it. It's actually less expensive than buying it from Microsoft Direct. So, they're paying you to take it, basically, if you will, to take that better experience. Makes a ton of sense when the application makes sense. And that's still part of that process we talk about and the approaches and ways to get there, because there's other options as well that can still give you integration and it might have a host of other benefits that make more sense for the business, right?
Yeah. Good stuff. Milford, we've talked about business continuity, security, voice while working from home, but I know a lot of the organizations on the phone and a lot of the conversations you've been spearheading over the last several weeks have been around saving and creating new revenue streams. So a lot of the people on the phone rely on in-person meetings, certifications, conferences with their membership as a meaningful part of their revenue. Could you describe the conversations that you're having over the last couple of weeks and maybe share one or two of those?
You bet. So yeah, it's been an interesting environment over the last month. We've seen conferencing revenue go through the roof. Everyone has responded, and just to back up just a little bit, there's never been a better time to have that unified communications as a service discussion. As conferencing bills are going up, there's ways that we can wrap all this into an enterprise-grade package that is mission critical. So I just wanted to make that point. As this pandemic has hit, I've seen, everybody saw the rush on toilet paper. The CEO of Walmart says the next thing is hair color, which is just awesome. From my seat, what I'm seeing is virtual events. So there is a mad rush on virtual events right now. Companies are trying to save that annual revenue. They have an annual event that they're either charging vendors or charging their membership for, and they're trying to save that. And the reality is we don't know what the future holds. We don't know if we're going to be able to hold those events this summer or this fall. So there's ways to virtualize those events and actually put this on the web to where they can have a full virtual experience. So in essence, you're virtualizing your event or your trade show where you can have booths, you can have keynote speakers, you can have all of the things you would normally do in an in-person event without the travel. Some of the providers that we represent they're booking out. So we have companies that are trying to secure these for May, June, and now July, and May and June are completely booked. So we're having to turn away some of that business. So if you're thinking about trying to save some of that revenue, we'd love to have a conversation with you to virtualize those events. There's all kinds of software. There's all kinds of programs out there. To give you an idea, a very high-end event that's managed white glove with project managers to hold your hand through the whole thing starts at around $30,000 and then goes up from there depending on how many individual sessions you have, how many booths and all that stuff. So we're seeing those get as high as $500,000. But when you look at some of these large associations and companies that are, you know, not having to book that physical space, it's very cost effective.
Yeah, and I know we were just, you and I were just having a conversation. All of the big technology firms, VMware, EMC, AWS, all we're getting into conference season around August, September, October, and they're starting to publish now their virtual events. So they're not canceling, they're just pivoting on how they're going to deliver that content. So instead of having to go to Vegas for 4 days, you can sit in your home for 24 hours and get most of that content still consumed. Not that Vegas isn't fun, but if you've done it once, I mean,
well,
you've kind of done it.
The thing I'll add, Mike, is some of the strategies to keep people engaged on these virtual events are pretty cool. I mean, there's gamification, there's tracks to get people interactive. So, you know, if you have an 8-hour trade show for 3 different days, the studies are showing that people are staying engaged for 6 of those 8 hours, which is just amazing. So as you're considering a technology, and there's all kinds of stuff out there, right? But it comes down to how do you have a successful event that you'll want to replicate over and over again. If you can't hold people's attention and if you can't make it fun and interactive, then next time people come to do it, they'll just say, I'm going to pass. So I think it's important as companies are looking to virtualize those events, select technology that's really going to help you secure that and make it a great event for everybody involved.
How much lead time, Jeff, when I think about taking a trade show that probably takes a year to get together, how much of that, I know I'm putting you on the spot with like lead time, how long does it take to set something like that up? How much of the content directly transfers, just generally?
Yeah, so, you know, once we get an agreement in place and a project manager is assigned, it's usually 6 to 8 weeks to build the virtual event. And we're talking virtual trade show, you know, booths, vendor setups, keynote speakers. Setting up the complete construct is usually 6 to 8 weeks. So just to give you an idea of, and we'd like to get those on the calendar because, like you say, there's a mad rush going on with everyone flocking to try to secure those. So if you're thinking about doing something like that, we want to start those conversations sooner rather than later. The other thing that I'll mention is, you know, dates are a little bit more flexible. So what we're finding is companies that were going to host something in June have no problem pushing it to July or August because you're not securing physical space. You're just saying, when are we going to have this event? So if you have some flexibility there and have the lead times, we can certainly help you out there.
Jeff, we have a question from the attendees on they're able to deliver the content, but their biggest challenge is doing effective networking virtually, which is a key attraction for in-person meetings. Do you have any insights into how that's being done?
Yeah, so when you walk into a virtual trade show, it's all about the user experience. So you can have, like I say, a keynote speaker where it's an auditorium type and you have 3,000 or 4,000 people listening to that. But when you walk into a booth at a trade show, you have those one-on-one conversations and you're talking about specific products or services. So these booths have sidebar conversations where you can set up, whether it's a third-party conference call, whether it's a Zoom room, or whether it's a WebEx session. There's ways to have a chat session immediately, and then if that conversation escalates to a video call, no problem. They've got all the vendors are standing by. You have project managers there to help facilitate that one-on-one communication.
And then we have another question, Jeff. There's a reason you're the most popular guy these days. What platforms are being used for virtual events and trade shows and stuff?
Yeah, there's a bunch out there. You know, ARG is pretty picky about who we recommend and represent. There's apps that you can buy online. There's free services out there. We tend to focus on the higher end services that have that white glove construct, and they do cost a little bit more. But once again, we've learned from years and years of doing this that's really required because most of our customers have never done this before, And so to think that you have the expertise to pull off a virtual trade show, it's just not realistic. So, you know, some of the providers, our number one go-to these days is through Intrado, which is legacy Intercall. They have a wonderful program, and once again, it's not the cheapest, but they certainly do a great job.
Yeah, the one thing I'll put into context there is, you know, I know the one project that you wrapped up last week, you know, was more into that 300,000 for a full multi-day. But when you think about that particular organization and who their members are and what it would have cost them to do this and deploy assets and go to Vegas and the fully loaded cost, if you look at the profit margin on the virtual event, they're actually significantly more profitable with a lighter lift on the virtual event than they would have been if they deployed all those assets for multiple weeks to Vegas. So it's a different model, right? A different model, but potentially as we come out the other side of this, business has completely changed. Expectations have changed quite a bit, and you know, could be an unbelievable new and much more profitable revenue stream for a lot of people on the phone. That's good stuff, Jeff. Thank you. Another huge topic that we're hearing nearly every day, and it's becoming more and more relevant, is just how do we, any project that comes with cost savings typically is something that organizations are keeping and progressing forward. Would you just take a few minutes, Pat? There's kind of two lenses I'd love for you to address that we're seeing. The first is we just don't know what the extent of the financial impact of the last 5 weeks is going to be. So give me just a couple things on expectations around wireless usage and some of the conversations you're having, maybe some ways that we can help clients control and optimize those costs, wireline and wireless.
Sure. Well, interestingly enough, we are starting to really see the effects of the work from home environment in the wireless networks, and quite frankly, also in the broadband world as well. One of the studies or one of the reports I was reading had broadband up to about 35% increase in usage over the last month or so, and wireless specifically was about a 20% increase in the data usage. So that, you know, we're starting to feel those effects in the market. I think one of the things that's really important is that none of us are built for that kind of increase, right? So nobody was projecting a 20% increase in your corporate liable bills or in any of your billing, really. And to manage through that is going to be a challenge. I think the most important thing to remind everybody on the phone is the real reason you want to take a look at it, in my opinion. It's not a one-to-one increase. It's not a 20% increase in usage is going to be a 20% increase in cost. Wireless overage charges for data are $15 per gigabyte. So if your 20% increase, you know, is a sizable number, you know, at $15 per gig for that 20%, that's, you know, that's typically a 2 or even 3x increase in your wireless bill. So the market has responded. There's a couple of ways to go about it. We have a couple of partners that we work with regularly. One of which has offered a no-cost solution, quite frankly, to monitor usage pre-billing. There's a sign-up process. You have to be engaged. It's an API with the carriers, and they get feeds directly from those systems that will allow the company to report back to you where you are in usage and recommendations for plan changes to accommodate that. It's not, you know, it's disaster avoidance. It's not a full-blown audit. It's not a full-blown optimization. It's a way to manage your usage so you can pay less than you would if you weren't doing something about that. It's a no-cost offer for about 60 days. At least that's the plan going in. But as we know, we're in uncertain times, so that may be extended or decreased depending on what happens in the world today. You know, the other thing is quite frankly, you know, cost management, whether it's mobility or wireline, just in general. You know, one of the things that we advocate for is expense management. And really that is two flavors. There's, you know, one-time audits, which if you're a smaller organization, that may make the most sense, where you can take a look at where you've been, and certainly now in this first month of increased usage, it's a fair sample size, and right size your plans. Right size your plans, right size the programs that you're operating under. There's lots of options out there. None of them are really designed to be easy for you or for us as the consumers to work our way through. Mistakes generally aren't made in the customer's favor, if you know what I mean. So we have a couple of ways to do that. Again, from an audit-only standpoint for smaller clients, it may be a time to bring on a third party like ARG, powered by different software opportunities, to take over management of those, because along with the rising invoices, rising usage, changing the patterns of your users, so the other projects we just talked about, right? So maybe we don't want that to be a thing that falls through the cracks, because that does lead to real dollars, and budgets are something you don't want to lose track of in these times. I know that you've hit everybody for costs along the way, so I'll jump right into that one first. From an audit standpoint, it can be anywhere from the audits are typically one-time charges, 20 to 50%, 25 to 50% is a percentage of savings, annualized savings. The work gets done, the changes get implemented, verified, and then turns back over to you guys for management. On the ongoing management side, where you're actually bringing on a managed service partner for those accounts, if you will, it's about $4 to $6 per line. And the value there is not only the one-time optimization, because that happens up front no matter what, but it's managing that month to month and making changes in real time prior to the bill cycle. So you can definitely avoid more surprise billing moving forward. And then on the wire line side, similarly, great opportunity to take a look at what's out there. Many organizations have added over time and taken a real holistic view of what do I have, what am I paying for, does it match contracts, is it what it should be. Most companies operate in the threshold for pain. Plus minus X% of what it was last month, pay the bill. If it's more than that, dig in and find out why. If it's less than that, just let it fly. There's never really a baseline set of this is what it should be, and this does make sense. So that's where all of the engagements start. And then typically we're looking at a 2 to 4% of the spend in those wire line engagements, but everything comes with a savings guarantee. If you're evaluating options and there's not a savings guarantee, you should keep moving, because really that's the value of this whole process, is to put you in a better position afterwards than you're in beforehand. If you're not, then there's really no reason to move forward with that.
Good stuff. Thank you, Pat. And awesome that we're able to cover revenue generation and cost savings kind of back to back. So thank you for that. Greg, I'd like to ask you just to spend a minute or two. Obviously, you're the owner of a business with less than 500 employees, and there's stimulus packages available in the marketplace, and some of that comes with caveats from the SBA on those loans. Would you spend just a minute or two talking about our experience and then some of the benefits that are available to many of those on the call today?
So absolutely. With the SBA program that was passed by Congress, the Paycheck Protection Plan, if you do have less than 500 employees, you're eligible for this loan, which is essentially 2.5 times your payroll costs, monthly payroll costs. Great program. Hopefully everyone's applied and gotten approved. I understand this morning they actually maxed out the dollars that were allocated by Congress. Hopefully that'll be extended. But if you've got that loan, the cool feature is you are forgiven the loan. In other words, you don't have to pay back the loan up to what you pay out in payroll for 8 weeks, plus what you pay in lease payments or mortgage payments, plus what you pay in utilities. And in the utilities, that includes your phone and internet bills. So we would urge you, if you got a PPP loan, to you only get forgiven for what you pay. So you really want to look and make sure in the 8 weeks following the loan that you're paying those bills, because the government's going to essentially reimburse you for those. Beyond that, if you didn't qualify for one of those loans, or you have concerns where you're really trying to protect your extent of expenses, our client experience team will work with you. We're tracking every vendor's willingness to accommodate adjustments if you can't make payments. Now, what could be done? And by and large, providers are really willing to work. If we work it collaboratively with them, they'll do more for you. So just reach out to our team, and we're ready and have a lot of information to help you achieve better in that.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope that's of benefit to everyone on the line here. We've certainly been the beneficiary of it. So let me just share. I'll leave you all with this. More so now than ever, one of the core tenets of our business is random acts of kindness. We continue to practice this within our business. I've gotten some pizza, some Target gift cards for family movie night, some cupcakes have been delivered to my front door from anything but bundt cakes, I think is what it was. So appreciative of my coworkers putting a little smile on my face as I start the day. Go to our website, get some inspiration. We post a lot of stories there, but want to continue to just make this part of how we end every one of our sessions. It's really important to us, and it's something that we think we can leave with you all, and you can use as a source of inspiration and a source of good news when some of that's hard to come by when you turn on the TV. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate you coming. Really hope this was valuable. Please provide us feedback, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks when we do it again. Thank you.